more pragmatically, the other debt issues, I'm not sure I feel exactly the same way, but, I think I've perseverated enough in here, God knows. But what I will say is that I totally agree with you on the student loan thing. And it's because of the bankruptcy thing and other things. But I think the student loan thing is a legitimate trap. The rest of it, I don't find it as much of a trap again. But like the student loan thing, I think is like a real place where someone can make a meaningful difference. Ignorance and poverty are our natural conditions, and they'll simply never be entirely wiped out. That doesn't mean that their existence means we're not doing a good job. But yeah, it's always going to be there, because it's outcomes.
So the other thing that I wanted to talk about is student loan debt. And I would love to hear what everyone thinks about that. Basically, that would be one area where I think this idea of like having a government-backed loan that's like a blank check to universities for students to pursue careers where they'll never be able to pay it back. I feel like that needs to change. That needs to be regulated. And I think that like we need a completely different system for that. My simplest idea is to only lend as much as can be reasonably paid for the given degree that someone's going after. So in other words, you would say like, hey, this person's, because they're in this degree, the most likely income level or the average income level in this degree is X. So therefore I'm willing to lend up to, X percentage of that salary per year. They'll be able to make payments that are equal to like, just say like 15% of their income or 10% or whatever to pay down that student debt over the course of 20 years or whatever. So you can actually say like what the maximum that you'll be able to lend and guarantee federally for that particular degree. And then basically, any university is charging, for these liberal arts degrees and stuff like that, where they're charging crazy amounts of money for these private educations where the graduates will never be able to pay it down. That will just kind of like go away. And the sort of restriction on what the federal government will back will actually sort of take care of the problem. And everyone else is going to, like the schools are going to have to find a way to make it work. So that means a bunch of like private schools and stuff like that will go out of business. And they'll have to find new ways to sort of be more efficient with what they have and deliver a better degree. It'll just create competition. So, and then like, meanwhile, if you're like studying in a career where you're going to make a ton of money, then, you can actually, you'll be able to get access to an education that's a bit more expensive than if you're going after like an arts degree or something like that. Not that there's anything wrong with it. Anyone can do whatever they want. I think these are great things. We need artists, but at the same time, like we have to invest the right amount of money into these things, given where people are actually going to come out from a income perspective down the road. So right now it's a blank check and we're all paying it, and these loans will never get paid back. So basically when people eventually die and are unable to pay back their student debt, it's just going to sit there forever. The last thing I want to say is that I think like with technology, AI, educators, and, just sort of like what we could do with remote learning, I think it's going to change everything. So the idea that the reason that all these schools exist and that the sort of old way of doing things exists is because there's just essentially like unlimited money that will fund these things coming and backed by the government. So the idea that we should forgive all these loans, I think, is actually, I am not at all opposed to it. I am opposed to it if we do it before we fix the problem. So I think we should fix the problem first, or come up with a solution to the problem where it's like sort of predictive based on the sort of future lifetime income level for the person, and then lend up to a certain percentage of that. And then once that's in place or something along those lines, then you could say, hey, we fucked up everything up until this point, and because we made this huge mistake, we're going to waive everything, but we fixed the system. I think that's what we got to do. We can't just waive the debt at this point without fixing the root cause problem.
So wait for it. I totally agree with you. I think the problem with student loan debt is that it's not like the rest of debt, and it's been like cherry picked into this weird position. And if you were to take that away, then a lot of things would happen. I don't necessarily, so I don't think you would structurally say this job can get debt and this job won't, but it would allow the free market to price the debt, right? So if you go to borrow $100,000 to go to school and you're being an electrical engineer, there'd be different terms, different structures, maybe even different rates and whatnot than that same education to be like a, art history major or something like that. Not that art or history aren't important, but that along that point, I think the whole problem is like other places. Every time we keep the free market away from something, it gets really bad. And part two, I think, is to just, as a nation, realize that what people needed to go to college for 30 or 40 years ago, like when I went to college, a lot of that stuff, a lot of it should be provided publicly and then just wait for it. If kids are going to school through 18 with the technology and the state of the world these days, it's not, forget about like big education comments. Frankly, they're just in school too much to learn too little. So we should just teach them more before they're done and then let the free market work out the rest. And no, don't make it perfect, but make a step in the right direction. And speaking of which, you got to let people discharge this debt in bankruptcy. Otherwise, the whole system stays, not the whole system, that sounds dramatic, but that's a key part that needs to happen.
That makes complete sense, and that's why it's never going to happen, because it's the liberal arts and humanities departments that depend on these blank checks for their survival, and they produce all the journalism majors, so they control all the press, so therefore they're upstream of culture and the politicians, and so they're just basically never going to let that happen. I think the stranglehold of the university system is not going to be broken until we solve the credentialing problem. How do you credential people without universities? IQ tests are conveniently illegal for employers to give, so the closest proxy they have is a university degree, which has been hacked like heck to both wreck taxpayers as well as put people through a 4-year hazing ritual that they don't necessarily need to go through. So how do you solve the credentialing problem? And it's getting solved a little bit in tech because that is a more merit-oriented system, but how do you solve it everywhere else? Because a college degree right now is the gatekeeper to a good white-collar job.
I understand where you're coming from, but in the UK at least, a lot of the kids that go to universities to study the liberal arts subjects actually come from some of the wealthier families, and they're not going to university to train so that they can get a job. That's not their priority. Their priority is finding something, reasonably fun to spend their time doing for the next few years. And the kids who do need to train and get a degree to get a job, I can see getting a harder run of things in this situation that you're describing, potentially.
This is so true. Everything I know, I've taught myself because I didn't have the privilege of going to college or university. So I don't have those credentials, and that has really stopped me from getting certain opportunities. But thank God for AI, because I'm now able to build things myself and go straight to the market, go straight to the people. And that has been a gift.
Lead code is actually very interesting in that regard because it's used by a lot of tech companies to assess whether you can code, but a lot of people who are very good at coding are not necessarily good at lead code. So yeah, it's quite hard to have a good credentialing mechanism, basically.
Credentialing, unfortunately, has a network effect problem, which is you're not going to bother to put in the time to get a credential unless everybody accepts it, and everyone's not going to even know about it, let alone accept it, unless there are a lot of candidates who are credentialed that way and have already been proven to be good. So it is a very tough nut to crack.
Yep, to borrow a term from Terry Pratchett, there is an absolute shortage of iron in the head going around, which is to say, sort of hard, angular, no bullshit, merciless, ice-cold, logical thinking. Not only immune, but actively allergic to nonsense. And I'll tell you why, Keith. It's because people are lazy. It's a choice. Almost anyone is capable of at least some measure of actual logical thinking, but it's hard. People much prefer to float around in the pink amniotic ooze of woolly, wishful thinking, pre-rational, sentimentalist nonsense, and just, woo, man, going with the flow. Fucking hippies, man. Every single last one of them. I'm just saying, if vaccines actually caused autism, the world would be in a much better shape than it is right now.
The pink amniotic ooze. I'm stealing that one. I'm telling you, South Africa is getting introduced to a whole new... I love it, man. Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know what you guys are talking about specifically, right? But that was just a beautiful expression. And I do agree that, people that believe that vaccines cause autism, belong to a whole different thinking category. But that was just fun. Thank you.
Fact check. Google says if we went back 125 generations, we would get back to our collective family tree and be able to identify how we are all related.
In these conditions, we can still encourage, teach, educate, and inspire people to believe that it is possible for them. I think too often we are focused on extracting value from a situation we don't want to be in instead of encouraging and teaching people to leave the situation that they don't like. I want the focus of the narrative to be on, hey, you can do something for yourself, and encouraging people to believe it. And I don't care about the people who you can never be convinced, but there's definitely a large group of people who don't believe that they can and don't believe owning a business is available to them because it's too hard. They're not smart enough. They don't have enough expertise, and none of that is true. And practically, I've been able to support multiple friends of mine to do that for themselves, where they make more money now than they ever did working for someone, working for themselves, providing value to people that they can connect with in multiple different sectors. But in the beginning of our talk, they're just like, oh, I don't know how, that's too hard. I can't do that. But it's not too hard. And in fact, it's actually way less hard than, working for people. And I think when we say, oh, people just are not interested in it, or they don't know, or they're too caught up, I think these are all may or may not be true, but they're not really relevant to changing the conversation and changing the narrative. Those are all memetics anyway. So I'm just proposing that we as a culture, shift that memetic and just be like, hey, you can provide value. I think there's a hint of this that is coming up with creator culture, where, people are creating entertainment. But I think we can press more making small businesses that allow you to support your own life, and that it's hard and it's challenging, but that it's fun, and that people are smart enough and capable enough and resilient enough to make that happen.
Do you really think they're upstream still? I know it might look like that as a snapshot, but from a trend perspective, I think they're pretty much gone, right? I mean, is the media even important anymore, or will it be? It seems like we all kind of pretend like it is, but we all know it isn't, and it's just a matter of time until everyone acts like it isn't.
I think they're upstream of it in the sense of being an intolerant minority that can hold hostage and stop anything from changing. However, I think as soon as there's any real difficulty, I don't know, people have to go off to war, and all of a sudden everyone at once is like, well, yeah, that was all very dumb. That can't be the metric. So I do think they're upstream of it in the current world, but I think there will be some difficulty. And just there's no more doing bullshit when there's work to do, right? People got to go off to war and go to the factories and whatever it means, I think a lot of this stuff are signs of idolatry. And as much as I look out, as much as it's a frustrating time and whatnot, generally speaking, I guess it's mediocrity. It's time for mediocrity to reign supreme, which is going to happen because more than ever before, it's just possible to get by. It's everyone can work some job that like at least keeps them alive while they play on their phone, and they can go on like that forever. So we're in this kind of bad portion of equilibrium, I think, or maybe not bad, but like, enjoy it while it lasts, I guess. And it's probably like that pile of sand thing, right? Where it's just like, this is the process by which all this just seems so preposterous. And then this is maybe how the Overton window opens. And then at some point in the future, enough people are just like, yeah, but there's so many damn problems. Like, that's enough. You gotta, I'm sorry. You just we gotta live in reality here.
I agree. Anyone who solves credentialing will be changing the world. I'm watching more and more jobs open up to apprenticeships, but even the apprenticeships are different based on the state where you obtain the credentials. For example, in Rhode Island, it's not possible to apprentice for more than one trade or crafts. For example, plumbing, heating, AC. Each of these is a concurrent apprenticeship, which means that a lot of people are crossing the border and going to Massachusetts, where you can apprentice under one master and get all your licenses in one space. In my own history, my first licenses were appraising and adjusting. I don't think you need to have a university degree to write a car or to reconcile a claim, but that was the gatekeeping position. So as more and more legitimate companies say, you know what, we're going to bypass this and get the best people and we're going to train you, I think you'll start to see credentialing walls break down. Where I agree that you won't see this solved is in academia, because there is a self-preservation interest going. But not only that, because I don't think people in academia are sitting around saying, well, let me see how I can preserve my institution or myself today. We're not getting that far. We can't agree what the skill set is to recreate the next set of standards. I've had so many sets of standards passed down the pipeline. Well, today we're going to do the NCSS standards. Tomorrow we're going to do the LMNOP standards. And they're all radical changes. Education can't agree on the font they're going to use or the format to coordinate the literature to the mathematics standards. So how are they going to agree on the skill set that you need in your business? They can't. And I think that's where the disconnect and the breakdown needs to be solved in order to get a universal credentialing system that we can apply. I don't think it can be, so I think it'll fall back on the micro level. Well, AngelList will take these people because we will train them in-house and we think you're amazing. JP Morgan will take these people because we think you're amazing. Joe's Plumbing and Construction will take these people, and then you have a path to become an engineer. Other countries do this very well. I think that we will start to see more of this, or I hope we will.
How do you encourage and teach people to find their own callings? Is that because you are familiar with each other and you can identify their talents more easily than themselves? Or is that because you have the talent to recognize any traits from anyone? Technically, I still don't know my own callings. And I read, reflect, and try different things, but I'm still on the way and sometimes confused.
The privilege of going to college or university. That's something that most people in the United States complain about, the costs, being indoctrinated by the man, whatever. But the privilege, you saying that, Siboy, it makes me feel so humbled and blessed. But at the same time, I know we're at a pivotal time in history where if I can learn from anywhere in the universe and people are giving me a shot based on my learning, then I'm grateful other people throughout the world will have that shot too. That should be both invigorating because we will be able to collaborate with more people. And it should be terrifying to people in countries where university has always been the norm and not the privilege. So thank you for letting me reflect on this today.
Is that what it is, or is the world actually changing and we just don't realize it? So is it really mediocrity, or is it just, due to automation and general technology driven efficiency that there really isn't the need for a bunch of people to work anymore? And now there's is everyone just going to turn into a content creator? Is that where we're going? I know it feels like mediocrity if you work hard. I work hard. And, having people who don't want to work hard working for me, that bothers the hell out of me. But at the same time, like, if you're starting out, are you going to kill yourself when you could just hang out and be a content creator?
I'm glad it made you reflect on the gifts that you have. It is a privilege that if my family could afford, I would have definitely taken it to go to college. I would have paid for that. But I that's not how my life went. And yet, I take it that I have agency as a human being. So I have to create opportunities with the cards that I've been dealt, and just embrace it. It's my fate, amor fati.
Where I think there's a disconnect with what you're referring to in terms of like people taking over the credentialing is that there aren't that many countries with an engineering base anymore. And I'm speaking specifically about engineering, but you know what I mean, because it's kind of the ecosystem needs to have a closed loop in the sense where the training then blends into, how the workforce is being used. But because so much of things are outsourced at the moment, you're getting to a point where many industries are actually very disconnected from the workforce that actually does the manufacturing, for example. And what you have mostly are people that are in sales. You have like global companies, but you don't really have as many atomic, cohesive, small businesses because almost everything is a conglomerate. And when everything is a conglomerate, you don't have that kind of apprenticeship system where that kind of training happens. You do in some countries, but as more and more of the conglomerates start taking over, the corner shop is always up against, the Tesco or the large mart. So the abstraction of globalization and large brands is causing that to go away.
Dustin, are you saying it would be more difficult to create a credentialing system because conglomerates move slow? I wasn't sure I understood. I was thinking the opposite, that if conglomerates could do it, like, for example, car companies in Germany have the apprenticeship. It's very, very prestigious. Here, like JP Morgan was starting to target interns. And then maybe another company that was also a conglomerate could say, hey, they did the heavy lifting. We will also accept these equivalent credentials. Is that what we're discussing, or am I missing what you're saying because you're talking specifically about engineering? But I think we would first have to agree on the types of jobs that would be appropriate for credentialing systems versus really needing that traditional education and college degree. For example, my neurosurgeon, should I need one, I would really appreciate their college degree. Maybe they can apprentice after that, and maybe their continuing ed could be subject to credentialing instead of even more degrees. But there are some professions I think really need to have that solid foundation. Versus careers like human services, teaching, tech, trades, even law, engineering, anything where you could learn and demonstrate that knowledge and work under the supervision of a master would be appropriate to have an alternate path, I think. And that brings us right back to the point that universities et al. Will not go quietly into the night, but I am curious to see over the next years if somebody could tackle credentialing.
The credentialing discussion is really difficult because the order of operations matter, the direction of what happens. Credentialing comes long after something is innovative. So you're kind of pushing on string or like flapping the tail a little bit. Now, the process by which something becomes a credential, maybe you could think about, but you're never going to replace the ancient institutions that have now become defunct, which is sort of what we're watching here. So that's my thoughts on credentialing. And then, honestly, quote unquote credentialing is either in kind of compliance fields like accounting and tax and law and things like that. And then the other type of credentialing is academic credentialing. But in the real world, like we can talk about what happens in academia, but in the real world, if you, in your profession, when you meet a 35-year-old person that's accomplished and you want to work with, are you looking for a credential anymore? Because I think at least in careers, quickly credentialing falls by the wayside of reputation, talent, tenacity, etc. But I guess out loud, I don't think ever in my life have I allowed someone's credential to completely blind me to just independent thought. And I think we'd probably agree that's good general advice, that it doesn't matter. I mean, that's one of Cialdini's 7 sources of human bias, is authority bias. But at least for me personally, and I'm sure there's areas I'm unaware, but generally speaking, I don't give a fuck what your credential is, right? And that's true in my daily life as well. Like, this was the thing with the guy up in Storyland. Like, you just you don't get to be authoritative over my children because it's not about credentials, it's about reality. You're not in charge. Just because you work here, I could give a fuck. But it does point out that the reality that there's sometimes things that you genuinely want, and you should go for, and then you have to do stuff that you don't want to do. That might sound familiar, in order to do them, because that's how the real world works. So sometimes a lot of times, frankly, and usually to get the privilege to work on the really interesting stuff, you do in fact have to do a lot of work to be there and understand the context at which that bleeding edge of the art exists. I forget if this was in the movie or in a book I was reading, but I think someone goes to Mozart and asks, like, how do I become Mozart? It's like, oh well, see, get a good teacher locally and practice every day, and then sleep well and exercise, and then find a university, and then try and get a graduate program and get a seat in a choir, and then always be practicing every day, and then that's how you would get here. Now, of course, the person who's asking Mozart of this is like, well, I mean, that's just like general advice for everyone. You're Mozart. That's your advice to me? He says, oh, yeah, but, when I was your age, I wasn't going around asking people how to be a composer.
I do think we're talking about two separate things. One, my perspective on building social tech so people can feel more empowered to start their own small business is not really a skill I personally have. But two, separately, definitely people in my life, it is easier for me to see their talent, but most of the time it's not even that. Most of the time it's just encouraging them to dream it up themselves and to be able to feel empowered to even believe that it's possible for them. But why don't we start another group to discuss this? A little bit of a spin-off.